Good evening, class. My name is Brianna Clark, and I am here to talk to you all about my Louisiana slave database poster. Throughout this project, I actually learned a lot of things that I didn't know, not just about slavery, but also about SPSS. So first, I'm going to start off by talking to you guys about my abstract. And in my abstract, I actually talk about how slavery is a very sad part of our history. Slaves, they helped to build this country, and they did it while being treated like animals. They were taken from their homes and everything that they were used to, just to build this country in the way that the slaveholder wanted it to be. Slaves were treated like they had no worth, and families were torn apart, lives were changed, and it was all for the benefit of someone else's life. So in my figure one, it actually talked about the sex of the slaves. So it showed the males and the females. Now, what I learned was that it really didn't matter whether you were a man or a woman. It just mattered that you were a slave and that you can do the work. So if you were a man and you could do the work, they wanted you. If you were a woman and you could do the work, they wanted you. So in this figure, I noticed that it was only about a 5,000 person difference between the male and the female. So that told me that there was a lot of slaves. It didn't matter what your sex was. Secondly, I saw in figure two that the largest group of slaves were actually black. The second largest group, which was a very small number, percentage of slaves, the race was not accounted for. They were actually, it was missing. And then the third largest group was mulatto, which is half black and half white. That caught my attention because mulatto came from the slaves who were actually raped. Majority of mulattoes were the product of a rape by a slave owner or something like that. And so that just kind of dove into slavery more, and it showed how bad the treatment was, because not only were the female slaves being treated like animals and having to work day in and day out, but they were also being raped on a daily basis by their owners. Um, you don't really see any other races that were slaves at that time, but about 80% of the slaves, more than 80% of the slaves were black. And then in figure three, you actually see the ages of the different slaves. And most of the slaves are middle ages, were in their middle ages. The majority of slaves were between the age of 26 and 30. Um, and then when you look at it as a whole, you see that a majority of the slaves are between the age of 12 and 50. And what I got from that was that they couldn't take slaves too young because they wouldn't be able to withstand the harsh conditions of slavery. And then you couldn't really take slaves that were too old because they would just not be physically able to do the things that was needed as a slave. So majority of the slaves were middle age, and were physically able to do the things that were required of a slave. And then here you will see the continent of Africa, and where majority of the slaves were taken from. And then in my conclusion, I stated that SPS was extremely helpful and informational for me when looking at this very large set of data. At first, when I saw all the numbers and the data, I was very confused and I didn't know what to do. But then when I started to take time out and to understand SPSS, I was able to start making graphs and analyze the data in a more organized and clear way so that I was able to understand the data fully. I'm very happy that I was able to do this project because I learned a lot more than I did know about slavery and about SPSS. I enjoyed this project, and I hope that you enjoyed my presentation. I hope that you learned a little bit more about slavery, and the conditions that were at that time. Thank you, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening.